First of all, I think I always struggle with this concept of strategy for technology, strategy for innovation, etc. Because in my mind, there's only one strategy. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, strategies for business, and there are different pieces that plug into it, and you seamlessly go back and forth to optimize the overall picture. And everything is about business. So I'm not able to break it down to that level of granularity to say this is technology strategy and this is innovation strategy and this is the different shades of strategy. To me, it's just one continuum. On the topic of strategy, the other thought that I want to mention is that I spent some time a few years ago at Stanford, and there was a professor out there by the name of Professor Bergel. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him, but he is an authority on strategy, and he spent a lifetime studying fairly successful technology companies, technology businesses in the high-tech space, and how they develop strategy. And he came to one conclusion. And he said, there are two things. One is strategic planning, where you consciously look at all the parameters, map out the ecosystem, and put a plan in place. And every company does it, and every company should do it, and it's a good thing. But there's something that's actually more important than strategy planning. And it's called strategic recognition. And the reason that that's important is that no matter what strategy you developed, right, it was based on certain data, certain information, and certain assumptions, and you can be rest assured that by the time you complete the process of creating your strategy, some or significant part of that would have changed. And the environment around you is changing. And so, if you want to develop a capability related to strategy within your organization, the capability that you need to develop is one of strategic recognition, because you need to be watching and tracking and monitoring what's happening around you very closely, so you know how to adapt to it or how to adjust to it. I'll give you a simple example, and an example that I'm sure all of you can relate to. One of the leading companies, leading technology companies of our times is Intel. Right? And what do we know Intel for? Microchips. We know Intel for microchips. What kind of microchips?
Integrated processors.
We know them for processors. Right? Here's the funny part. Intel did not start out as a processor company. Intel did not start out as a processor company. They stumbled upon the concept of a processor. How did that happen? They started out as a memory chip company. And their core competency was process technology to build those memory chips. And they differentiated themselves on it. And before they realized that, I'm going back to the 60s and 70s, the Japanese came into play and beat the hell out of it. They were able to do it better, cheaper, faster. And Intel was struggling to figure out whether they would survive or not. And then they started getting into customs chip development engagements. And the first 4 or 5 projects that they did were all roughly the same. They were doing 4-bit processors. And they said, aha, there's going to be something here. I said, well, it looks like more people are going to need these types of chips, so why don't we just develop one and sell it to all of them? But this wasn't a typical boardroom strategy. This is a perfect example of strategic recognition. So I think the ability to watch your environment very closely and see what's happening and what the implications are and what the opportunities are is actually a very profound capability that organizations should develop. And it also plays into the example that you used of Clayton Christensen. The reason why those companies, those businesses, and those technologies will disrupt you is because you're not tracking what's changing in the environment. So changing what's happening in the environment is extremely profound from that point of view. And I think as businesses, we need to invest adequately in this dimension of tracking what's happening around us in the customer base, in the supplier base, in the overall ecosystem, and drawing our own conclusions in terms of what that might mean and how we want to respond to it, in a proactive and not in a reactive way. So that's, I think, one key thread that I wanted to share. The other thing I want to talk about is coming from a point of view of the electronics industry, which is the industry, broadly speaking, that I'm a part of and the industry that I understand to some extent. I would pick on some of the things that Nikolai and David said. Now, in the electronics industry, if you're looking at business in India, I think this is perhaps the best time ever to be playing in that space. And the reason is very simple. Going back to some of the concepts and putting those concepts into practice, what were presented a bit earlier. Today, majority of the electronics that we consume in India are being imported. Right? Everybody knows that. We all, the branded stuff that we use, even for what is labeled as manufactured in India, a final assembly may happen in India, but almost all the components and the IP that goes into components is being imported. It's not being made in India. Today we consume about $40 billion worth of electronics goods in the country, give or take, depending on whose numbers you believe. And the rate at which the consumption of electronics goods in India has been increasing is upwards of 25%, 20 to 25% compound annual growth over the last few years, which means if you were looking at this data a few years ago, you would be talking about maybe $5 billion. So it's growing at a rate that you need to take notice of. Now, all projections tell us that this number will grow to, in the $400 billion by 2020. And if as a country we keep importing all of this stuff, this is going to be bigger than an oil import bill, which means there's an economic crisis waiting to happen. And the good news is that the government's taken notice of this. So they are working on a draft bill called the National Policy on Electronics, which will be announced sometime in 2012 if the government can function, given where we are today. Once that gets announced, it has some very far-reaching implications, right? And it's going to create an enabling environment and an ecosystem that's conducive to investments in designing, developing, manufacturing, getting products to market. It's going to incentivize R&D, it's going to incentivize IP creation. Entrepreneurs and startups coming up, we've got some excellent product ideas, solution ideas, leveraging electronics as a technology. And they are creating some IP, they are building the solution in India, but they are sourcing some technology and some components from partners in China, in Taiwan. And they have a vision. They have a vision that as the ecosystem develops, they will do more and more in India. But today, it's not there. So they're not being held back by the fact that the ecosystem is not fully developed in the country. They are taking a global view. I know this one company which is in the security vertical. There's another company that's in the healthcare vertical. And they are tying up with partners in Israel, partners in China, partners in Taiwan, partners in Malaysia, and partners in India to bring their solution to market. And those solutions should come to market sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. So